Hey, welcome everybody. Today I have Michael Kravets with me from MTK Consulting. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Tim. How's it going?
Hey, I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for being here today. Hey, now I know your background. You're a writing coach. You've got some education background, some technical, pretty heavy-duty technical background. Would you share with folks a little bit about your background and how you came to be a writing coach today?
Sure, Tim. My background is industrial arts, auto restoration, and English. Um, so I picked up a master's in English in 1989. I've been teaching writing and literature since 1987, and decided that helping folks write books is really my true calling. So that's what I'm here to do.
And how did you get to that point from, I know you taught English, you've got some classroom background. How did you get to the point where you wanted to help folks and many folks, as we know, feel they have a book inside them? How did you get to the point where you felt like that was really your niche? That's where you wanted to focus?
After I left education with my wife, found our business, MTK Consulting, I did the tech side of things, and after she passed away, I had to reinvent my business and decided that I would focus on my strengths, which are teaching and helping people learn to write. There is a big market, like you suggest, for people who want to write books, but a lot of people don't know how to get started, and so I can help with everything from idea generation to getting stuff out of your head to structure, style, all the way down to editing for punctuation and grammar.
So I'm curious. As you know, I've got a bit of a writing background myself, not as formally as you, but I've been involved in writing groups throughout the Kansas City area for several years on and off. I've known a lot of folks, as I know you have, who have always said, "I want to write a book. I've got something to say." And it seems now is the perfect time for that to happen. We're all restricted from doing activities outside of the home. And yet I've visited with some folks I know who are still struggling with getting there, getting from that desire to write that to actually getting words on paper. When you find folks like that, how do you work with them? How do you get them past that and get them into the active mode of writing?
Well, the thing I like to tell folks is we've been writing and telling stories since we've been human. So it's part and parcel of what it means to be human. And everything that they're sitting at home watching TV, everything that they see on that box starts with a written word. So if they have a story to tell, now would be a good time to tell it. And what I expect to see when this is all over is many people telling their stories of how they made it through, just like people have their stories of how they made it through the Depression and World War II. And so the best way to get started is not worry about things like having an outline or worry about how you're going to structure things. The thing to do is just get it all out of your head. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that ideas are slippery. The best analogy I've come up with is you can have a really great idea in the shower, and by the time you're dried off, that idea is gone. So the important thing to do is just get it all written down. There's a couple of ways to do that. Of course, you can use a word processor. You can use pen and ink. If you feel uncomfortable with the act of writing, one of the things you can do is record your voice as you tell your story, or record a video telling your story, and then take it to a place like Temi.com, where for really reasonable rates, they can do a transcript. Once you have that transcript, or once you have the ideas out of your head in writing, two things happen. One, you don't have to worry about whether you're remembering that idea because you have it written down. The other thing is you can now work with it. You can look at it, you can play with it, you can try different structures, you can try different styles. It's really kind of like a Lego set that you can then put together into what your story is and how you want to tell it.
So from what you're saying, it sounds to me like you're saying that the idea, capturing that idea initially is critical,
Yes.
but you don't want to let that get away, and then just get that out in whatever fashion. So so editing then becomes so writing is just kind of an introduction to the editing process, if I'm understanding you correctly.
I think that's true. Writing is an iterative act. In other words, you write and then you think about what you've written and you rewrite and you do that over and over again. But it's not something that happens continually. For example, um, the best way to revise is to write something and let it sit for a couple of days. And one of the things I've found over the years is that when you edit something you've just written, you have all of the connections in your mind that make that writing make sense to you. So you don't see the holes, you don't see the gaps, you don't see where things are off. But if you let it sit for a couple of days and you come back to it, those connections are gone. So what you have left is just what's on the page, and it makes it a whole lot easier to revise. The other thing I would say is that early revisions deal with things like structure and content, and the ideas, not so much grammar, punctuation, and spelling. Unless it really annoys you, I would put that stuff off to the final edit, because that's just you're better off spending your time working with the big picture and then narrowing it down rather than starting with the picky details, because once you get into those weeds, it's hard to get out.
Yeah, so that's just kind of noise you can let sit for a while as
Yeah,
you really develop the meat of the story.
yeah.
So I'm curious. It sounds then again like from what you're saying that to have a general idea and a general direction, and maybe sketch out a few key points, road posts along the way, is a good way to start. It doesn't sound like you're a real fan of highly detailed outlines.
I think the best way to do an outline is to let it evolve naturally out of the content that you produce. Again, that's one of those things where you can get too focused on, you know, how things should be, when you know that once you get into that iterative process of writing and editing and writing and editing, your outline is going to change. A lot of people like to start with a title. I personally don't, simply because I look at titles as, say you and I meet somebody that I know and you don't. Okay, you don't know that person, so I have to do the introduction. You can't introduce that person to me. Well, until you write your story, until you've got it fleshed out, you really don't know what to call it. And so people that start with titles never end up with the title they start with. That changes too. So what I'm suggesting is the stuff that's variable, let it organically come out of what you're doing.
Sounds good. A couple of things, Michael. I'm curious as to what you see as some of the biggest traps possibly that folks fall into. As we're at home, we have more time. What are those things that may be the biggest hindrance to us to actually starting, or even if we start, to staying with our story?
I think the biggest trap is distraction. Um, the entertainment industry makes its money off of distracting us, and so it's really easy to become distracted. But I would say, as far as the act itself goes, one of the biggest traps is editing as you write. In other words, you write down a sentence and then you go over that sentence and say, well, this word needs to be changed, that word needs to be changed. Just get it down, get it out, come back to it later.
Sounds good. Hey, so, in terms of folks getting started, are you a fan of routine? Finding a certain time each day to write, finding a certain, I'm going to sit down and write for an hour at this time of day, or are you a more organic? Do you take a more organic approach to that?
Well, I think routine is important because, like any skill, the more you practice it, the better you become at it. And any athlete will tell you that, their practice times are the most valuable times because it prepares them for the event. Well, the event in this case is publishing your book. So the more that you can schedule that time, the better off you are, because you are actually going to sit down and do it. I'm not a big fan of waiting for inspiration, because as you wait for inspiration, you can be distracted by any number of things, and inspiration will never come. So writing is a deliberate act. It's something that you can practice, and as you practice, you become better at it.
Sounds good. Sounds really good. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for being here today. I'm anticipating that once folks are kind of freed up from this work from home, stay at home, you're going to be a busy guy.
I hope I am.
Oh,
And
good
thanks for
deal.
having me, Jim. I
You
appreciate
bet.
being here.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Bye.